First of all, I want to say welcome and thank you all for coming to the Inamori International Center for Ethics and Excellence. If some of you don't know me, I am Shannon French. I'm the director of this center. And the purpose of this center is to promote global ethical leadership. And we do this by encouraging interdisciplinary conversations about ethics. And as an outreach of that, we also try to support research and education in ethics that, again, cuts across all disciplines so that we can have open dialogue and pursue truth together. So thank you all for coming to this event. I am very delighted today to be able to introduce to you one of my former colleagues from the U.S. Naval Academy, Captain Rick Rubel. When I first got to the Naval Academy, Captain Rubel was actually serving as Dean of the School of Engineering, so something familiar to all of us here at Case Western. But he was also teaching in the critical core ethics course that all of the midshipmen, as we call the students there, have to take as a requirement for them to take before they graduate. And as time went on and Dr. Rubel's interest in ethics grew and his research and scholarship in that area, he ended up, in fact, becoming the course director for that same required core ethics course. And he is now the distinguished military professor in ethics in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the Naval Academy. And I should mention that in his work to teach military ethics, he has spoken to a wide variety of audiences beyond the Naval Academy, including he and I, along with some colleagues, had the great privilege of conducting a series of intense seminars for Navy and Marine Corps chaplains all over the world. I have to admit there were some fun aspects to that, like going to Italy and Japan. But really, it was enlightening for us to meet these men and women who were being deployed with our troops and be able to discuss current, very crucial ethical issues with them. Captain Rubel has also worked and continues to work with the chaplains up at the Chaplaincy School in Rhode Island and with the JAG Corps. Those of you who don't watch the didn't watch the television show JAG, that's the Navy lawyers. And he also has produced, co-edited an excellent series of case studies, a textbook and a case study book for the core ethics course that has been adopted, and this is quite a compliment, has been adopted by all of the NROTC programs nationwide. So he has come to us today on my invitation to tell us a bit about how you try to teach these very difficult, in some ways hard to pin down subjects of ethics, leadership, and character development. So he's going to speak to you from his 11 years of experience at the Naval Academy and also take your questions, and hopefully we'll have a valuable exchange here and discussion about how we can all learn the best ways to promote character development, ethics education in a diverse setting, and particularly with a focus on professional and applied ethics. So with that, I would like to hand you over to Captain Rick Rubel.
Not a day goes by where we don't wish Dr. French was back at the Academy, but it's your gain. As she mentioned, I am going to talk about character, ethics, and leadership, and those are three very hard to explain concepts, and it's even harder to explain how the three are related: character, ethics, and leadership. The relationship is very subtle, and I'm going to try to explain that here in a minute, and try and sort of programmatically how we approach it. So that's kind of where we're going. And some of the things I'm going to talk about, obviously the Naval Academy has a very different mission than, not very different, but somewhat different mission than the university here. And there's some differences and there's some similarities, and you'll see the similarities as we go through also. A couple years ago, we started with this idea of starting with the end and working backwards. We said, a bunch of us got together, the DMPs, Distinguished Military Professors, got together and said, this young man's going to walk across the stage at graduation and shake the president's hand. The president will be there next week. And what do we want this graduate to be when he shakes the hand of the president and graduates? What do we want he or she to be? What do we want them to have in them? And so we kind of took it that way, and let's work it backwards. Let's start with the end in mind, as they say, and work it backwards. And so what we came up with is this, I don't know, it's a phrase, that, we want him to be an ethical leader of character. Wow, what does that mean? That sounds like a bumper sticker, right? It sounds like a slogan in a brochure. I don't do brochures. and I don't do slogans. I do programs. So I take that pretty seriously, and not just as a slogan, but what does it actually mean? How do you do that, right? So ethical leader character, obviously it has three components. It has ethics, it has leadership, it has character. But how do you describe that, first of all, the second bullet? How do you describe that? And then more importantly, and we'll talk about in a minute, how do you actually develop it? But in terms of describing it, our mission is a little bit different, as I said. Our mission here is to develop midshipmen, and there's three things: morally, mentally, and physically. Those are three things. They're very different. And to imbue them with the highest ideals of duty, honor, and loyalty. And those are three virtues we'll talk about in a minute: duty, honor, and loyalty. And we want to graduate leaders who are dedicated to a career of serving their country and the highest responsibilities of government and citizenship. So that's our mission. I mean, it's pretty clear, those three things: moral, mental, and physical, and those three virtues. And so we broke it down a little bit further and said, okay, what do we want this graduate to be? Well, we want this graduate to be, I know this sounds like programmatics. I know this sounds like a brochure. I'm going to get past that very shortly. We want this person to be selfless. I want to be selfless, without self. You can't serve unless you're selfless. We want this person to be inspirational. They have to be a leader that's going to want people are going to want to follow. We want this person to be proficient at their job, technically and academically. We want them to be innovative. We don't want robots. We don't want people that just comply. We want people to think of other ways of doing things, critical thinking. We really need that. We want them to be articulate and be able, of course, to communicate and be adaptable, because in this world, things change by the moment. And then, of course, we want to be professional, in a profession of arms, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So that's kind of where we think we need to go in terms of the qualities we want our graduate to have. And I am going to talk specifically about how do you get there. So this is the hard one. How do you actually develop this ethical leader character? How do you instill all those things into a graduate, to a young 17, 18, 19-year-old person? It's the same people that go to school here. They just chose to go to the Naval Academy. It's the same person. So how do we do this? And it kind of starts with this question of, what does it mean to be a naval officer? What does it mean to be an officer in the military? And just a quick side story, the two most opposite colleges in the country, St. John's College and the Naval Academy, 100 feet apart. St. John's, very liberal college. It goes back to the 1600s. They study the 32 great books of man. It's a wonderful school, but probably the most opposite from the Naval Academy. The two things we do together every year, one is we play croquet against each other, and we get beaten every year. I don't know why, but they just kill us in croquet. And the second thing we do every year is we take about 50 of our midshipman students over to St. John's and have this great discussion about philosophy. The first time we did this, I thought, oh, this is going to be weird, because we've got our guys in uniform, and St. John's students are wearing cutoffs and sweatshirts. It was really something, because I don't know if you were there, but the first one, it just took 5 minutes, and we had these great discussion going about philosophy. But in the process of the discussion, one of the St. John's students, a female, asked one of our midshipmen this question: what's it mean to be an officer? What does it mean to be a warrior? And he was all dressed in his blue suit, and he drew a breath. And I said, well, this ought to be interesting. I can't wait to hear this. He was a junior. And he told her, he said, well, being a warrior is not what you think. There's a warrior ethos, but it's more about decision making. He said, as officers, what we bring to the table is our ability to make decisions. And he says, we have to make decisions quickly. It's a high-tech world. We have to make them faster than our enemy, but also we have to make the right decision in many dimensions. We have to be right legally, right tactically, right ethically, right strategically, and we have to be right in terms of taking care of our people. And everybody at the table looked at me, and I said, what he said. I couldn't do any better than that. He really got it. He really was expressing this relationship between character, ethics, and leadership. We got to do it right. We can't just make the decision just to win the battle. We have to do it right in all those dimensions. So I think he said it about as well as I could say it, and probably better than I could say it. He was talking about this. He was talking about multidimensional decision making, and that's kind of what we're trying to talk about here. You have to make decisions that are multidimensional. And you know what? If you look at a problem multidimensionally, you may get a little bit different answer from each dimension. What may be right legally may not be morally. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. And just because it's tactical doesn't mean it's right. So we have to consider that. So what we need is an integrated approach, obviously. We need to be able to tie all these things together. We need to find the common messages, the common themes that we need to tell our students for the whole 4 years, because we have them for 4 years. And we even want our coaches around the academy to be talking to their teams in these ways, and it's working. I was listening to the basketball coach a couple months ago talk to his basketball team about character. And I heard the lacrosse coach, Richie Meade, talking to his team about character. And so the messages of character and ethics and doing it right, it has to be across the curriculum, even in the sports curriculum. Of course, we have to be able to talk about theory and application, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we have to instill in these young men and women an identity. Now, I know we've got some young folks here too, but it's hard to put an identity into a 19-year-old person. I mean, they want to be a college student and have fun. I don't blame them. So it's hard to give a young person identity. Think about it. We're trying to get them to identify to be an officer. We call it officership. I'm not even sure it's a real word, but it's an officership. And we're trying to get them to think of themselves as future officers. And again, that's not easy. What does officership mean? Well, in a cheesy diagram, it means this. If the goal is to understand your profession, which is the profession of arms, if that's the roof, then the floor has to be character, right? You have to have that character. And we'll talk in a minute about what does it mean to have character. And the pillars of this little house, if you will, is, they have to be a standard bearer of the profession. They have to uphold those standards. They have to be a servant of the nation, and that gets back to this idea of being selfless and serving. And they have to win the next war. We have to have warriors to win the next war. We don't want to ever lose a war. So this little kind of cheesy diagram, it's just to say that that's what officership is to us. And I think sometimes a picture is better than a bunch of words. So, and this is the last programmatic slide I'll give you, I promise, and I'll move out of programmatics, because programmatics can be really boring. But this is the 4-year curriculum, and it starts with this summer, we call Plebe Summer, where they come in June, and it's like a boot camp. And I don't know if any of you have been to a boot camp, but it's tough. I mean, we run them around, and we yell at them. And here's the idea of the transition. If you can picture this, a high school student standing outside of a building with their parents in civilian clothes in a big long line, and they go in this door, and the parents stay outside, and they go in this door, and their life changes. They're no longer that super high school student they were a few minutes ago. They're now a midshipman at the Naval Academy, and they literally take their civilian clothes off and put on their uniform and mail their clothes home, and they have to be in the service. That's hard. We teach in my ethics course, we teach this thing called the priority of loyalties, because it's different than for a civilian. At the highest is the Constitution of the United States. We take an oath to that, right? We raise our hand and we say to support and defend the Constitution. We take an oath to that. And then below that is the mission, the job, the orders that you're given. And below that is your service, your Navy, your Marine Corps. And then your ship and your shipmate. And guess what? Self is at the bottom. And I ask my students, why is self at the bottom of this list? That's a terrible place to put oneself, at the bottom of an inverted pyramid. Why does it have to be at the bottom? Well, they get it. They get it. They understand you have to be selfless. They understand you have to serve. They understand that these things are now more important than them. But that feeling you get when you walk through the door of that building on your first day and leave your parents behind, that feeling's hard to describe. It's this sort of knot in your stomach, this sort of, what am I doing here, disorientation. You know what that feeling is, that first day of Plebe Summer, is the feeling of self dropping from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. And it drops all at once. Just think how hard that is. You're a high school superstar, and then all of a sudden you drop to the bottom of the list. Don't minimize how hard that is, folks. But you have to do it. You have to go through that. For all those reasons I just said, you have to be selfless. But please don't minimize how difficult that is for these young people to leave yourself behind. So back to this other slide. I guess this other thing is, and one of the slogans we use at the Naval Academy is, it's not about me. And again, that's hard for most of us to say, right? Most of us are self-absorbed and self-concerned, and to say it's not about me is sometimes difficult. So if it's not about me, who's it about? What do you think? If it's not about me, who's it about? This is audience participation. Yes, sir?
Going up.
Yeah, it's about going up. Yeah, it's about your country. It's about something bigger than you, right? It's about your people. It's about your troops that you're going to be leading. Because when you're a leader, they'll follow you no matter what. So you got to be right. So it's not about you anymore. It's about them, right? So one more time back to this little slide here, and then I won't come back to it. But their freshman year, we give them a lot of practice at followership. To be a good leader, you got to be a good follower. So we give them lots of practice at following. Very tough year in terms of doing what you're told. But then as you go through the curriculum, we talk about behavioral science and talk about leadership, and mainly Their freshman year is about understanding about yourself, learning about yourself, your personality, your makeup, your strengths, your weaknesses, your own personal vision, your own personal mission, and learning about your self-assessment. And then the sophomore year, it's about this ethics course that I direct, as Dr. French was saying. And I'll talk a little more about that ethics course. And then their junior year, it's more about understanding how to apply all this to being a leader and motivating people. And then their senior year, it's about this capstone seminar where we take them off for a whole day and talk about officership. And I'll talk a little more about that also. So we talked about the plebe course. The ethics course, I mean, these are the objectives of the ethics course. It's about the profession, about understanding your responsibilities as an officer. It's about the preparation, about actually preparing them for the kind of things they're going to see by giving them dilemmas and situations and putting them in there, say, okay, what would you do? It's about actually helping them think through their moral reasoning, by thinking through moral problems and giving them some examples of how to think through these very difficult problems. And most importantly to me, it's this fourth one. It's self-examination. I want them to understand themselves. I want them to think more deeply about themselves and their own morals. I can't give them morals. They're 18, 19, 21 years old. But I can challenge them to think about their morals and their character. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And the fourth one is to actually improve their moral reasoning. And I've got some data that shows that we actually can do that. So you know, I get these kind of comments from my students at the end of the semester. Sort of, they're anonymous. I thought about the actions required of me that I'll have to be making in a very short time when I get out there in the fleet. This course challenged me to think about who I am and what I stand for. I love that one. And I learned that officers have been held to higher moral standards. So some of them, not all of them, but some of them get it. Some of them get what the course is about. Not all of them, of course. So let's talk about a few concepts here real quickly. We talked a little bit about officership. What about ethics and character and leadership and how they're related? Let's talk about ethics first. My premise, folks, is that all moral behavior is individual behavior. And I know that may sound obvious, but if you think about it, people like to say that certain organizations have moral, ethical climates. I'm not sure that's true. I think moral behavior is individual. Look at Enron with Ken Lay making all these immoral decisions and Bernie Madoff and all these people who made big decisions immorally for the whole organization. Or you look at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, remember a couple years ago, where those guards at the very lowest level made some immoral decisions for the whole organization. So whether it's the person at the top or the people at the bottom, it's still individual moral behavior. Does that make sense? I mean, it's still an individual person making a decision, right and wrong. So I don't think it's organizational as much as it is individual. That's my premise. So let's talk a little bit about individual moral reasoning. And let's start with this. What is the moral condition of our country and our youth? I mean, and this is kind of a starting point of where we see ethics. In a survey a couple years ago, our country, when asked about what they think about the moral condition of our country, over 80% thought that the moral condition of our country was poor or only fair. And what's worse than that is over 80% of Americans thought it was getting worse. So that's not good news. In a similar survey of high school students in 2006, look at what they're saying. This is self-reporting. 98% of the high school students believe it important to be persons of good character. 92% of them are satisfied with their own ethics and character, and 74% agree that when it comes to doing the right thing, they're better off than most. So this is what they think about themselves. But now look at what they're reporting. 81% have said they've lied to a parent about something significant in the last year. 62% have lied to a teacher. 33% have plagiarized from the internet in the last year. 60% have cheated on a test in the last year. And 23% have stolen from a parent. And 28% have stolen from a store. So let me just in terms of participation here, just with you all, how do you resolve those blue letters from the red letters? How do you resolve the fact that they think they're okay, but then they're reporting these numbers in red? How do you view that? We just get some feedback, please. How do we explain that? Yes, sir.
If everybody does it, it's not bad.
Exactly. Yeah. If everybody's doing it, it's not bad. How else do you think we can explain this? Yes, sir. Ma'am, I'm sorry.
They're not identifying themselves as having bad character. They're thinking maybe this is someone else.
Right. That's a great point. They think themselves are okay, but they see other people doing it, and that's somehow wrong. And that's a really good point. Yes, ma'am.
We reward B hoping for A.
Say that again, please.
We reward B hoping for A.
That's really interesting. We reward B hoping for A. That's really very profound.
We send mixed messages
We do. We do it all the time. We send mixed messages, don't we? Someone else had their hand up?
Ideal. Maybe parents and everybody has pressured them into food writing, that that's the ideal situation.
So you're saying they understand the ideal, but they're just not living up to it? That sort of thing? Yeah. Any other thoughts on it? These are all very interesting ideas. Yes, sir.
They don't see that their moral character is based on what the reflection of their family.
They don't see the moral character as a reflection of their family.
So, in the sense that there's the dichotomy between what their family should be about.
And what they do.
Okay, so they're seeing one thing and doing something else. Could it be like the lady said in the back that we're sending mixed messages, that we're maybe as adults we're saying one thing and doing something else? Maybe, I don't know. Any other thoughts? I mean, this is very interesting, your thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
Integrity is sort of abstract, and I think
Yeah.
Young people don't really think through what it means in terms of their concrete behavior every day.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard what she said, but integrity is abstract, and people don't see that every day in their behavior, is what she's saying. That's a great point. I think you all see this. Anybody else? Did you have something, ma'am? Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that it suggests that they can excuse the kind of behavior, like cheating and so forth, because
Right.
there's always a good reason for doing it. It's not.
That's a great point. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I mean, clearly, we're all sort of saying the same thing. Clearly, they've lowered their own standards, right? They think that they're okay, but they've lowered their standards a bit to say that this is permissible, and I think that's kind of what you were saying. Well, and I don't want to beat it to death, but I mean, there's something going on here, right? And I'm not at all saying anything bad about this generation. They're great kids. The millennial generation is shown to be what we thought they'd be. They're great kids. They have loyalties and values, and they work well together. They have universal truths that they're willing to believe in. These are great kids. But we have sent mixed messages, as you said, which maybe has allowed some of this. The other part of this, though, and back to the Naval Academy piece, the other part of this, which is the good news, is that in every survey for the last 27 years, the military has been the most trusted profession. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that our country is going to give us all this awesome firepower, bombs and missiles and ships and tanks, and expects us to use them right. Our country expects us to use this stuff right, and that's our obligation in ethics, right? That's why we have to teach ethics at the Naval Academy, because we have to do it right. We're uniquely responsible for all weaponry, and we've got to do it right. Everybody's kind of turning their heads to see other, police, sure. Of course, the justice. Where's the justice system down here?
Where are universities?
Universities. Let's see.
It just says public schools.
Public schools. I don't know about universities, but the military is 12% higher than the next one, which is the police. And just as one interesting note, in 2005, this little standpipe here, military went down 10% and then came back up the next year. Why do you think it went down in 2005, 12%? Yeah, Abu Ghraib prison. Abu Ghraib prison, which points out the challenges of leadership for us. It just takes a few bad people in a very large group to do something bad, and the entire country's opinion of the military drops 12%. That's leadership. That's how hard it is. So the good news is that we are trusted. The bad news is we have to do it right. So ethics starts with these two questions, folks. I mean, I'm getting into just basic ethics and moral reasoning. These two questions are not rhetorical. They have answers. What is right, and then how do we decide? I mean, these have answers. So that's the starting point of ethics, are these two questions. And of course, the goal for us in ethics is to do the right thing all the time. That's the goal, is to do the right thing. But how do you determine what the right action is? I mean, that's not as easy as it sounds. My other premise here is that we make moral decisions all day long, but rarely think about, why did I just do what I did? You probably made a number of decisions already this morning, but never stop and think, wait, why did I just decide that? We don't think that way. We just make them. We're wired, and we make decisions. But we rarely think about that. But I think if we sit back and think about why we decided what we did, I think we begin to understand ourselves, and that can be very, very important. If I put you in a situation, a scene or a case or a scenario, and ask you why you did what you did, and I start asking you why, deeper and deeper and deeper, to try to get you to understand why you did what you did, sort of peel back the layers, if you will, you may start to understand why you decided what you did. Of course, it's called the Socratic Method, right? It's very effective, and it's also really annoying. That's why they killed Socrates. He's really annoying. He kept asking why. And I do this. I tell my students, don't kill me. I'm going to be Socratic, but I want you to think deeper and deeper about why. But within these answers of why, these deeper levels of why, lies what I call the core of your decision, why you made the decision you made. And we rarely think that deeply, and by understanding what's at the core of our decisions, I think we can begin to understand our own morality. And sometimes when you're at the core of your decision, it's just some basic principle that we didn't even know was there. Maybe I did what I did because of the golden rule. That was at the basis of my decision. Or maybe I did what I did for just practical reciprocity. You know, if I do it to him, he's going to do it back to me. Or maybe I believe in fairness and justice, and that's why I did it. Or maybe I just respect others, and that's why I decided what I'm going to do. Or maybe it's the 10 Commandments. Or maybe it's the universal test. That, you know, what if everybody did that? How would that work? But again, I believe there's great value in understanding this, in the deeper questions of why. And the great takeaway from my course, and in any ethics course, I think, is to be able to form a principle. We teach case studies a lot in the course, and at the end of the case study, I'm asking my students if you can form a principle, a personal principle. I will always do blank, or I will never do blank, principle. Well, principles are hard to form, and they're hard to live by, and they're hard to explain sometimes to other people. But as leaders, to the degree that we can form principles and live by them and explain them to our people, they'll know what we stand for when we're not there. Does that make sense? I mean, I've been in command, and I've had people say, Captain, you weren't there, but I think I know what you stand for, and I did it this way. I think I did the right thing, because they understood my principles. Again, does that make sense? I mean, that's the greatest takeaway, I think, from a lot of these sessions. So, just real quickly, I mean, the moral dilemmas in life sort of show up in 3 different categories. And I'm going to sort of talk about these, and then I'll talk more specifically in a minute. But right versus wrong. I mean, most of us know right from wrong, right? Most of us know right when we see it, know wrong when we see it. So let me ask you this. If we know right and wrong, why do we sometimes choose wrong? Any thoughts on that? If we know right and wrong, why do we choose wrong? Yes, ma'am. Emotional attachment, right? Our emotions get in the way, absolutely. Other thoughts? Why do we choose wrong? Yes, sir.
Because sometimes the wrong thing is easier.
It's easier, absolutely. We all know that.
Or more fun.
Or more fun. I mean, let's face it. Wrong can be more pleasurable in the short term, right? It's more fun. The chocolate cake, you know. Yes, ma'am.
We might choose wrong because everyone else is choosing wrong as well.
Exactly. I don't know if you heard it. We choose wrong because everyone else is doing it, and that somehow makes it right, or easier to do the wrong. That's a really good point. We all know the huge pressures of peer pressure. Yes, ma'am.
Personal interest.
Personal interest in what way?
Self-interest.
Self-interest, absolutely. We're all self-interested. Yes, sir. Consequences? Yeah, consequences. Sometimes we just kind of do the ends justify the means thing and say, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I know it's wrong, but the consequences are better. That's a great point. Yes, sir.
But most of these standards are actually that the standard by which something is right isn't the standard by which we're really judging. In other words, it's the ethically right thing to do by some standards.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about that standard.
Sure.
I want to be comfortable, or I want to be safe, or I want to be whatever. So,
right.
So it's a dimension issue.
It is. We can reject the norm. You know, we can say that's not the, or we can be a relativist and say that's right for them, but not for me. So yeah, there's lots of ways of kind of getting around it. But the fact is, we often know wrong and we choose it. Yes, sir.
Habit.
Habit. We just get used to doing it, right? Yeah. So, I mean, we've all got bad habits, I'm sure. So I mean, I think you all clearly understand right and wrong and why we sometimes choose wrong. The other situation, of course, is right versus right. And this is not as easy as it sounds. It's not just right versus right means you can't, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to win. It means you got to choose one right and leave another right behind. It means you may have a principle or something important that's right, and you're going to leave that behind. So that's not as easy as it sounds. And of course, the third situation, and the hardest one of all, is wrong versus wrong. And there's lots of these in life, unfortunately, where we have to pick the wrong. And it's not necessarily the lesser of the evils. That's just, we like to say that, but it's not that simple. I've got a lot of case studies where it's wrong versus wrong, and instead of asking the students, okay, what would you do? I say, okay, what are the different considerations here? And I'll just write on the board, and we'll get 35, 40 different considerations, things to think about. And I'll say, okay, which one of those is most important? Ooh. And they'll say, well, that one is. And I'll say, well, if you can decide which one is most important, it may, not always, but it may lead you to the right answer, or to the wrong that you want to pick. But wrong versus wrong is not simple, and you have to think deeply about which of these am I willing to give up to pick the other wrong. So those are just some thoughts about the 3 kinds of dilemmas we face. And so what I want to do for a few minutes is kind of talk about the kind of situations we teach, the kind of things that we talk about in ethics, and we'll get to character in a minute. But we've already talked about some of these. You know, under moral decision making, you know, what's the right thing to do and how do we decide? We've sort of talked about that a little bit already. And we talked a little bit about this already too. Why do we do the right thing? Do we do it just because of consequences, as you mentioned? Do we do it because of punishment, rewards, or as you mentioned, peer pressure? Forgot who said peer pressure, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Do we ever do the right thing just because it's right? Do we ever do it regardless of consequences just because it's right? That's kind of a high order, isn't it? We rarely do that. And how does character fit into this? We're going to talk about that in a minute. And how does moral courage fit into this? And getting back to what you said, sir, I mean, it seems usually harder to do the right thing. I don't know why. Why isn't it easier to do the right thing? I don't know, but it's usually harder to do the right thing, and that's kind of where you were going. So those are just some thoughts and questions about how we make moral decisions. Now, in this course, it's a military ethics course, so we talk directly about these kinds of issues. We talk about our role in the military. You know, what is our ethical role? And the first day of class, I asked my students, where do you get your morals and values from? Where did you personally get your morals and values? And most will say from their family and from their minister or priest. And we all have different sources of those values, right, and morals. And sometimes, as somebody said a minute ago, we interpret those a little differently, as you said. But a more important question to a military officer is this, you know, what is the new source of our obligation? Well, we take an oath. We hold up our right hand and take an oath to the Constitution. And the minute we say I do and put down our right hand, at that very moment we've incurred a whole new set of obligations. Some of these are legal, some of these are moral. And it's important to talk about those with my students because I want them to understand what it is they're getting into. Now, I teach my course sophomore year. It's a required course for all sophomores, but you know why it's sophomore year? Because you can go to the Naval Academy for the first 2 years and leave at any time. But at the beginning of your third year, you actually sign papers saying you're going to finish the Naval Academy plus 5 more years of service. So I want them to know in my course what it is they're getting into before they actually obligate. And so we talk about this oath and what it really means. We talk about rights. You know, we say in the military we're willing to fight and die for people's rights. So what are the rights? We have to talk about what are rights and where do they come from. And I actually want my students to realize that being in the military, you actually suspend some basic Bill of Rights. You have the right to freedom of speech, but not right now. You have the right for peaceable assembly, but not right now. And so on. And there are certain rights that we just can't exercise right now to be in the military, and I want them to understand that. We talk about loyalty. Loyalty, as somebody mentioned peer pressure a minute ago. You know, loyalty affects our decisions quite a bit. Somebody mentioned peer pressure, and we also have loyalties to our superiors, and we have loyalties to our subordinates, our people that work for us. And we have to be loyal to everything, but we shouldn't give up our honor for our loyalty. We should still be able to do the right thing. And so I wrote a case study called Leave No One Behind, which is a code we use in the military, right? And I think you all know what it means. It means that we're going to try to bring everyone back, either alive or we're going to bring back the body. And I think with that code comes this obligation that we're going to do everything we can to bring your loved one back to the families. It tightens the fighting spirit of the warrior to know that they will not be left behind. But also with that code, there's a huge burden, a moral burden, that's put on the commanding officer of a unit to send his healthy people after a wounded person, or send his healthy fighters after a body. Think about how difficult an obligation that is to get your healthy people and say, go get that body. I know it might risk your life, but we need to leave no one behind. And so with that code comes this huge obligation. And that's why I wrote the case study, because I want them to think now about what that really means. Also, we talk about things about this. How do you deal with your moral conscience knowing that you may have to do something like this? You may have to bomb a target in a war knowing that you might have to have collateral damage. Now, collateral damage is just a euphemism for killing innocent people. But we don't want to ever do it intentionally. We don't want to ever do it haphazardly. And we want to have a rigorous thought process we go through before we ever do this. But we also want to make sure that they're okay with it, that their moral conscience is clear. And so we talk about moral conscience in my course. I don't want them to ever hesitate. The worst thing you can do in a battle, folks, is to hesitate on the trigger. It can be fatal. So we don't want them to hesitate. We want them to deal with their moral conscience now, in the classroom. In the last set of things here is our role as a moral leader. We talk about issues like what's the fair way to treat people. And I wrote a case study about a female officer on a ship. And I co-authored this case study with another female officer. And it's not about assault, a sexual assault or harassment. It's much more subtle than that. She's continuously being put in awkward situations because of her gender, which are no fault of anybody's. It's just situational. But more and more she becomes upset and even disenfranchised. And you know what? We have to talk about this. Because when I wrote this case study, I showed it to other female lieutenants who read it and said, that was me. So we have to talk about issues of gender. We have mixed gender ships now, except for submarines. And people don't like to talk about these very sensitive issues of gender, but we have to talk about them. I find if you talk about issues, they dissolve. If you don't, they'll fester. So we talk about issues of gender. And we have to make sure that we are responsible, that we, to our troops, never give them an order that's not moral. As leaders, we have to make sure that all the orders we give our troops are moral, that we never ask anybody to do that. We talk about things like, who do you target? I mean, who is it permissible to target? I give them lists of targets and say, okay, like this one down here, it's this high-value target, but it's being shielded by women and children that are put there by their government. We've seen this in Iraq, right? Their government has put these women and children on the roof of this target. Are we going to bomb it? It's a very high-value target, but we're going to kill these innocent women and children that are involuntarily put there. That's a difficult moral issue for a military officer. I mean, one side says it's a high-value target. They put them there. The other side says, no, it's wrong to kill innocent people. So those are the kind of things we discuss. We also talk about just war. We talk about, when is it permissible to go to war? And so we have 7 criteria that have been developed over the ages, 3 more classic ones and 4 more modern ones. And we take our country's wars, Revolutionary War and so on, and we actually have the students go through these criteria and say, do these wars pass our criteria for just war? Well, guess what? They don't all pass, including the current war in Iraq. It doesn't pass cleanly. It doesn't pass the criteria for just war. So what does it pass? Well, there must be some other rules that we're talking about. But I think it's important to be able to have that discussion with your troops to say, why are we doing this? Why are we going to this war? And being able to explain in moral terms why we justify the war. One of the more difficult questions of military ethics is this one here. Do we want our troops to be morally responsible, or do we want them to do as they're told? I think the answer is yes, right? Both. We really do. We really want them to do as they're told, and we also really want them to be morally responsible. So within that compound sentence, you've got a paradox, right? You want both. And so how do we explain this? Well, I wrote a case study about Abu Ghraib prison because terrible things happened there, but some of those guards thought they were doing what they were supposed to do. Some of those guards thought they were supposed to harass those prisoners to get them to talk. Well, we wish they'd been more responsible. I also wrote a case study about this famous picture at Tiananmen Square, June 1988. You've probably all seen this picture where this man in the white shirt and a shopping bag stood in front of this column of tanks in Tiananmen Square, and you can't see, but there was another 100 tanks that were repositioning there. And this one lone guy stood in front of this row of tanks. The Western reporter that took this picture from his hotel room, he immediately took the picture out and put it in one of those little plastic containers and put it in his toilet bowl. A few minutes later, the Chinese police kicked the door open and stole all his equipment, except for this picture. When this picture was published, it emboldened the Chinese for human rights. And they don't know this guy's name. They call him the Tank Man. They were chanting the Tank Man when the Berlin Wall came down in 1991. But the case study is not about this guy. The case study is about this guy, the tank driver of the T-69 tank. And the question is, why did he stop? His army told him to proceed, run the guy over. He stopped. Didn't run the guy over. And they took this picture, which changed the world. So the question is, again, the Chinese wanted him to do as he was told, but we're glad he was morally responsible. So that's the case, that's the discussion there. Why did he stop? Now, the other part of this is how do you ethically conduct yourself in wars? I mean, the wars today are very ambiguous wars. We have checkpoints of terrorists and people blowing themselves up at checkpoints. We have terrorists hiding inside civilians' houses. I mean, it's a very ambiguous war. So we have lots of case studies about how difficult this is. I don't know if you remember this story about Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor. He was the Navy SEAL in Afghanistan that was, these 3 goat herders stumbled upon it. I don't know if you ever heard the story where they captured these, they were supposed to stay hidden, but these 3 goat herders with goats stumbled on them and they captured them. And they had to decide, what do? We can't kill them. If we let them go, they're going to go over the hill and tell the Taliban we're here. And there's only 4 of them, and there was 200 Taliban. So they're stuck with this very difficult decision of, do you kill these people or not? And they actually discussed it for an hour. And they actually took a vote. And the tie-breaking vote was Marcus Luttrell, who said, you know what, I can't live with myself and my religious conscience if I kill these people. So they let him go. Guess what? About 20 minutes later, 200 Taliban come over the hill, a ferocious 6-hour firefight, and everybody was killed except Marcus Luttrell. And then when they tried to rescue him with another helicopter SEAL team, that helicopter was blown out of the sky with an RPG, and those 19 were killed. So 20-something people were killed that day because they let these people go. So what was the right thing to do? Of course, the right thing to do was let them go. They're innocent, but it cost all these lives. And so again, within that case study is a difficult dilemma of military ethics of what do you do? Now, part of this idea of how do you conduct yourself in a war, we take, Shannon's covering her face here, we take the book from Dr. Shannon French, who wrote this incredible book called Code of the Warrior. And we use the book, and she's embarrassed up here. Didn't know I was going to plug her book. But we use the book because the Code of the Warrior is what we're trying to teach. And the Code of the Warrior basically means there are unwritten and written codes here, but it really means that the warrior has to fight honorably. And there's a lot to that. And it has to be not only fight honorably to protect the country and the unit that they're with, but they have to fight honorably to protect themselves. They've got to make sure they don't do anything that you can't live with, they can't live with. So this Code of the Warrior, again, it can be written, it can be unwritten, it can be self-imposed or externally imposed, but it separates the warrior from a barbarian, is what Dr. French says in her book. And we take that very seriously at the Naval Academy. We want these people to be warriors and not barbarians. And so this code is what separates them from that. Now, just to go one step further on this, and I know I'm getting into military stuff here, but that's what we do. I give it to the students this way. I try to present it to the students this way. As a combat leader, as a leader of troops in war, you have 3 huge responsibilities. You've got to protect your own troops. You don't want to risk them and lose any of your troops. You want to bring them all back home alive. You also want to protect the innocent non-combatants, like they did in the Marcus Luttrell story with the goat herders. You need to protect those people because they don't deserve to die. They haven't done anything wrong. They're innocent and they're non-combatants. So it's not a matter of just letting them go. We actually have to protect them. And the third part of this triangle is actually we have to complete the mission too, right? Now, it's hard to do all 3 of those things at the same time because often they'll conflict with one another. To get the mission done, you may have to risk your troops. To get the mission done, you may have to have collateral damage, as I said, on innocent non-combatants. This gentleman here, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Collins of the Royal Irish Marines, gave this really interesting speech the night before battle. We call it the eve of battle. The night before we went into Iraq, he got his troops together, a British Royal Marine, and he gave them this speech. And it's interesting. And I'm going to play it. It's only 2 minutes and 5 seconds long. Let me play it for you. And think about in the speech, if you would, which of these is he talking about, of these 3 of the triad? Because he says it very clearly. Of course, everything's on YouTube, right? By the way, this is not Lieutenant Colonel Tim Collins speaking. This is Kenneth Braun, the actor. They're making a movie about him. So, but it's word for word the same speech.
We are going into Iraq to liberate and not to conquer. We will not fly our flags in their country. Now, there are some who are alive at this moment who will not be alive shortly. Those of them who do not wish to go on that journey, we will not send them. As for the others, I expect you to rock their world. Wipe them out, if that's what they choose. If you are ferocious in battle, remember to be magnanimous in victory. Iraq is steeped in history. It is the site of the Garden of Eden, of the Great Flood. It is the birthplace of Abraham. You tread lightly there. You'll have to go a long way to find a more decent, generous, and upright people than the Iraqis. You'll be embarrassed at the hospitality they offer you, even though they have nothing. Do not treat them as refugees in their own country. Now, if there are casualties of war, remember that when they got up this morning and got dressed, they did not plan to die this day. So allow them dignity in death. Bury them with due reverence and properly mark their graves. It remains my foremost intention to bring every single one of you out alive. But there may be those among us who will not see the end of this campaign. And we will put them in their sleeping bags and we will send them back, and there will be no time for sorrow. We will grieve for them later. The enemy should be in no doubt that we are his nemesis and we are bringing about his rightful destruction. But remember, it is a big step to take another human life. It is not to be done lightly. I know of men who have taken life needlessly in other conflicts. I can assure you, they live with the mark of Cain upon them. And I know your mas will be in the queue at the co-op next week, and they won't want you to let them down. Let's bring everybody home safely and leave Iraq a better place for us having been there. Our business now is north. Good luck.
That's it, fellas. Well done. So let me ask you, which of the three parts of the triad do you think he was talking about? Which of these three do you think he was addressing? All of them, right? All of them. It's extraordinary speech. The night before battle, instead of taking him to the rifle range and working on their marksman skills or getting out the charts and maps, he gave him the speech. Why? Why do you think he gave a speech like this the night before battle? Any thoughts about that? It's extraordinary. Yes, sir.
Because the last thing they have on their mind is these three things.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, in a way, the most important line in the speech, and I don't know if you picked it up, the most important line in the speech is that I have known men who have taken life needlessly in other conflicts. They live with the mark of Cain upon them. He's doing just what Dr. French was talking about. He's preparing his people morally for the battle. They've already prepared them physically. He's preparing them morally. Don't take life needlessly. You can't live with it. They're making a movie about this. The BBC is. The movie's called The Mark of Cain. So clearly that's the point, right? So I'm just trying to get, I know these are difficult, different words than you're not used to hearing, but I'm trying to give you an idea of the kind of things we need to think about. The last thing here that I'll talk about, and then I'll move on, is a set of case studies. And the general category of these case studies is called Why Do Good People Do the Wrong Thing? And my premise here is that we're all good people in this room, but we've all probably done the wrong thing. And so why? I think that's worth analyzing, why good people can do the wrong thing. So we have a case study about these people who falsified the records of this aircraft that was being built. They were so loyal to the program that they falsified records and actually made stuff up to save the program. And I don't know if you remember, about 8 years ago, one of our jets in Italy clipped a gondola wire. I don't know if you remember reading about that. 20 Europeans were killed. They actually clipped the gondola wire while they were flying, and the gondola fell to the ground, and 20 Europeans were killed. Terrible. It was tragic. These two good Marine aviators were flying the plane, and they weren't court-martialed for the accident. They were court-martialed for conspiring and then destroying evidence. And so I teach this case study to my capstone group, the seminar that I teach for the seniors. And we give them this case study, and we ask them the question, why do you think these good people did the wrong thing? And they sit at their tables. There's 6 tables of 10. They sit at their tables and discuss why they think these good Marines did the wrong thing. Then I stop them and say, okay, instead of us guessing at this, why don't we ask Captain Joe Schweitzer, United States Marine Corps, Naval Academy Class of '89, to tell you why he did what he did. And this guy, Joe Schweitzer's in the room, and he comes forward and tells them the story. And they don't know he's there. When he's walking forward, they're saying, that's the guy, that's him. They don't know he's there during the first 10 minutes. And then he tells them in the first person, and it's the best explanation I've ever heard about why good people do the wrong thing. He starts out by saying, you're me and I'm you. I said right there, and you could be me. He says, I didn't wake up that morning knowing that I'd have to make the biggest moral decision in my life, but I'd had to, and I wasn't prepared. And his message to them is be prepared. Be prepared morally. He calls it moral fitness, right? We talk about physical fitness. We don't talk much about moral fitness. And that's his message to the mids. It's very powerful, him telling in the first person. So those are the kind of things we talk about. And just to kind of play off that a little bit, why do good people do the wrong thing? I taught a seminar out in Monterey, California about a year ago, and I had 6 different cases about why all good people do the wrong thing. And I talked a little bit, and I sent them off to different rooms. I said, tell me why you think these good people in these cases did the wrong thing. And they all listed them on their whiteboards. And then they all were in different rooms. They all came back and put their whiteboards up in front of the room. Guess what? They're all the same. Cases were different, but the reasons were all the same. And the reasons were basically this, that we can be in a climate where the guy, the boss at the top is unethical, and he sets that climate, and we end up thinking that that's okay. We get into this situation where we think the ends justify the means. If the ends are really important, then any means is permissible. We can do whatever we want. Why else do good people do the wrong thing? Well, we trivialize. We just say, this is just a little thing. It's not that big a deal. It's trivial, and we justify it that way. We sometimes say that, just this one time, I'm going to make this one exception for myself just now, right? We all done that? And so we make this one-time exception thing. Somebody else mentioned earlier about group thinking and peer pressure. We often can if everyone's doing it, it must be okay. Sometimes we do it just to preserve our jobs and our careers and ourselves. And of course, sometimes there's misplaced loyalty. We think we're doing it for the organization, but we're really doing the wrong thing. And lastly, we just lack moral courage. And we've all done that. We've all known it was wrong, and we lack moral courage. So these are just some ways of looking at the general idea of why good people do the wrong thing. It's just a list to think about. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about character for a minute, and then I'll be done and take questions here. I've only got about 5 minutes left. At the character workshop that I run for the seniors, I asked this question initially. How many of you think your character's been developed here? And most of them all raise their hands. And I ask them this question: who is your role model? And I ask them, what is it about this person that makes them your role model? What are the virtues of their character that you admire that makes them your role model? And they all list these different virtues of their role model. They all go around the table and tell everybody who their role model is. And then they list the virtues. And once again, all those virtues are very much in common. Their mother, their father, their grandfather, some coach or teacher. But those virtues that they admire in their role model is very much a common list. So the obvious point is, if they're going to go off and be leaders, those are probably the virtues that they need to embody, right? Because they need to be the role model of their people. We want their people to be like them and follow them. And so that's one of the starting points of this workshop, is this role model piece. I'll skip that. When we talk about virtues of character, our character is basically the sum of all our virtues. That's what our character is. All the virtues that we have, that's what our character is. But with virtues, more isn't always better. And the idea is one virtue like courage. And if you have too much courage, you're going to be foolhardy, right? You're going to do stupid stuff. If you have a deficiency of courage, you're going to be a coward. And same thing with pride. If you have too much pride, you're going to be arrogant. If you have a deficiency of pride, you may have low self-esteem, and so on. So in obedience, the same thing. We don't want blind followership, and we don't want disobedience. So in the middle is where the mean is. In the middle, you may, not necessarily, but you may make better decisions, right? You all see that? I mean, if I'm a cowardly person, I'm going to make cowardly decisions. If I'm a dishonest person, I may make dishonest decisions. So you want to stay in the middle here, and the mean is the idea. Now this next thing I developed about 2 years ago, and it's just an interesting kind of a tool we use here at the Naval Academy. It's a character map. It's a chance to map your character. And the way it works is just like I showed you a minute ago. You go through each of these virtues of your character. These are all human virtues. And you take, say, pride or whatever you want, honesty. Take each one. And if you think you have the right amount, you put an X in the middle. If you think you have an excess of that virtue, you'd put an X over here and a deficiency over here. And it's really interesting what happens. If you take this character map, not how you wish you were, but how you really are, you can learn a whole lot about your character. The first time I took this map on myself, I looked at it afterwards, and I had some extremes. I had some out here and out here. And these are the rough edges of our character. These are things that can cause you to make a bad decision. Not necessarily, but can. Again, if you're cowardly, you make cowardly decisions. So I took my 5 worst virtues on either side, and I just wrote them down, a little card in my wallet, the 5 worst ones, and I work on those every day. I mean, every day I open up my wallet and say, you know, working on that one, working on that one, got to do better on this one. But I really do believe our character can be developed. I really do believe we can. But first you have to know what to work on. When I was doing this a couple weeks ago to my seniors, I was looking over one of their shoulders, and he had humility all the way over here on the left, deficiency. So I was just kind of looking over his shoulder. I said, what's that about? And he says, well, sir, I just realized, you know, this is why everybody hates me. I said, what? And he said, yeah. He said, my girlfriend hates me. Everybody hates me. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I lack humility. He said, I'm too arrogant. I said, wow. I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'm going to work on it. Yeah, we can all work on this stuff. But first you got to identify it, right? Now we have a thing at the Naval Academy when you get caught in the honor concept, either lying or cheating, instead of just throwing everybody out, we sometimes remediate them, which means we work with them for 4, 5, 6 months to try to get them to understand why they did what they did and try to help them improve their character. And so when I just finished remediation about 3 weeks ago, and I asked him to fill out this character map, and he did, and I went through it with him line by line, and he was able pretty well to explain why he had some over here and over here. We had a good discussion, and then I handed the sheet back to him, and I said, okay, why'd you lie? And he took about 5 minutes. He looked at it went through each one again, and he circled 2 of them, actually, and he handed it back. He said, that's why I lied. He identified 2 of his own virtues of his character that kind of let him down, or even maybe caused him to lie. So we were able to spend the next 3 or 4 weeks talking about those virtues that he identified were his problems. And we made a lot of progress. I mean, I think he really understands himself a lot better. The last part of this, and then I'll get off this thing, the last part of this is that the first time I took this map on myself, as I mentioned, I did my 5 worst, but then I gave a blank one to give my wife to map my character. She's laughing, blame me. We've been married 35 years, and guess what? Her map of my character was different than my map, very different. And yeah, I mean, and when I went through line by line with her, I said, now why'd you put me here? And she explained it. I learned a lot about myself.
And you are still married.
And I'm still married, thank you. No, I really, it was the most informational thing about myself I've ever done. Line by line to understand it. You know, Winston Churchill says we have 3 characters. The one we have, the one we think we have, and the one other people see. Well, the difference between what we think we have and what other people see, that's a blind spot. We don't see ourselves objectively. So one of the interesting things we do here is give blank copies of this to the students to give to someone else. I had a student last Thanksgiving, went home over Thanksgiving and took 12 copies, gave one to her boyfriend, her mother, father, grandfather, and she took all the answers and put them on one sheet, and it was really fascinating. I said, Melissa, what'd you learn? And she said, I learned so much. My grandfather knows me better than anybody, is what she said. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm curious, you have the item of emotional intelligence there,
right.
which would include elements of self-awareness.
Sure.
But I don't see self-awareness otherwise identified. And I noticed that on one of the earlier surveys, I saw when you were doing the whole core, what you do freshman year, sophomore year, there was self-assessments. But I wonder if you can describe a little what you do to nurture self-awareness. Yeah,
besides all the battery of Myers-Briggs and all that kind of stuff we do plebe year, or freshman year, there's a lot of feedback. I mean, we call it 360-degree feedback. Every semester, every person gets feedback from everyone around them. And there's canned words you can use or your own words. And so there's no shortage of feedback in terms of how other people see you. And I think that helps with self-awareness. I really do. I know in my course, I continuously challenge their answers to think deeper and deeper, and I think that leads to self-awareness. But self-awareness is also embedded in some of these other ones. I mean, just understanding yourself enough to be able to map your character, I think, is in here. You're right, emotional intelligence that's a large piece of it. But I think there's lots of feedback. I mean, we're big on feedback, and positive and negative, of course. But anyway, I don't want to overplay this. It's very useful. It's not the ultimate solution, but it's very helpful, and we use it a lot to just help people understand the character and develop it. So how do you develop character? Well, I mean, you develop character a couple different ways. One is, you know, experientially. I am almost finished. I know it's going to be long here. Experientially, you know, we can model ourselves after our role models. That's why I asked about the role models. We can model ourselves after what I call virtuous people. If you see somebody that's your role model, you want to be like them. That's one step. Also, we test people's character. We put people under stress. In sports can be a test of character. Taking a final exam can be a test of character. Stressing people and then testing their character, that's one way to do it. We can also cognitively and even intellectually develop character. We can map our character like I just showed you in the character map. We can begin to see our actions in the context of our virtues. What I mean by that is to be able to say, you know what, I messed that thing up, and I think I didn't have enough blank, enough honesty, enough compassion, enough whatever it is, fill in the blank, integrity. But if we can see our actions in the context of individual virtues, then we can begin to correct our character. Does that make sense? I mean, that's how we do it. But you have to break it down to understand which virtue might have enabled you or caused you or helped you do something wrong. So what it looks like diagrammatically is this, that you know, our actions to a large degree reflect our character. And after we've had an action, we should be able to say, you know, did I do the right thing or the wrong thing? Was I good or bad? If it was good, I just want to keep habituating it, just keep doing it over and over again, so it's easy, it becomes our nature. But if it was bad, I need some corrective action here. And then hopefully I can fix my character. So when we were kids, right, our parents helped us do this, right? Timmy, don't hit your friend. And here, over here, corrective action. Timmy, go to your room, right? And as adults, we hope that we can do this ourselves, that we can evaluate our own behavior and correct our own character. Does that make sense? I mean, this is the idea of character development. Now, just one more thing, and then I will be done. I'll take your answers. I'll take your questions. This is the final cheesy diagram, I promise you. Part of this on remediation is a series of questions to try to get this person to understand why they did what they did. And one of the questions I ask them is this one here. If you knew it was wrong, why'd you do it? It's a tough question, isn't it? I mean, it's really hard for any of us to explain if it was wrong, why we do it. We talked a little bit about knowing right versus wrong, but choosing wrong. Well, diagrammatically, my answer to this question is this, and this is the last cheesy diagram. To do the right thing, to do the right action, I think requires two things. On this side, we have to have the morals and values to know what's right and wrong. And over here on this side, we have to have the character and all our virtues to actually do what's right. And so what happens to most of us is we know what's right and wrong. We talked about that earlier, right? Versus wrong, why we do wrong. We know what's right and wrong. But over here, sometimes it's one of those virtues of our character. Maybe we didn't have enough courage. Maybe we didn't have enough honesty. Maybe one of those virtues kind of had a lapse, and we just couldn't do the right thing. Does this make sense? We knew it was wrong, we couldn't do it. And this is, in many times, it's a character issue. So that's kind of the easy answer to, if I knew it was wrong, why'd you do it? Now, I've also got to say that there are people where I don't think this is quite right, where their morals aren't what I would consider right. And I actually talked to a midshipman last Friday who got caught lying in the honor concept of the Naval Academy, and she was real honest with me. She said, sir, you know, where I grew up in my high school, everybody cheated. And in my neighborhood, everybody did what they could to get away with anything they could. We stole, we did whatever we had to. And she has a 1.8 average, and she says, you know, I got to survive. And so she cheated. And she's basically telling me, she actually told me, that when she grew up, what's right is what you get away with, and what's wrong is what you get caught doing. Now that's a difficult, over here on the left side, right? That's difficult. Difficult to work with somebody who has a different set of morals and try to teach morals and try to unteach 19, 20 years of that kind of moral. So it's not always a character issue. It can be a moral issue. But I'm just trying to get you to think of them as two different things. They're clearly related, but they're also two different things. So I've gone on about an hour, and I want to stop here and give you a chance to ask questions. But what I've tried to do is talk to you about character, ethics, and leadership and how they all fit together. And I've been trying to talk to you about how we at the Naval Academy try to develop that into people and get them to think about right and wrong and think about this huge responsibility they have to be military officers and to be leading people into battle. That's a huge obligation, and they need to do it right. And that's the point of the ethics course. Yes, sir.
I really enjoyed what you've given me insight into. I looked and I was struck by the slide, where do we get our morals from our family and from our clergy, I guess.
Right.
I don't feel like I got any of that from any of them.
Where did you get yours?
I think I was born with it.
Really?
It's a part of me. And I think that's probably true with other people too. There's a body of research that goes along that line. What I find intriguing in there, if that's already built in me, it's part of my nervous system.
Yeah.
That when I'm taught to hate something, or when I develop a hate, I can overcome, I can drive past that moral decision. So there's something in the nervous system that allows me to suppress the moral behavior if I can hate it.
If you can hate it.
If I can hate it. And what was interesting about your example with this commander from the British forces was that he was, from my perspective, trying to reinforce something that was the antithesis of hate.
Yep. Good point.
Respect.
And he was telling them, this is what you need to do. You're going in here, you're going to be faced with it, and I need to build that side of your nervous system up so it will be able to tolerate something when you think you might want to hate it. You'll go over it.
You made a number of good points. I mean, what Lieutenant Colonel Tim Collins was doing is he was humanizing, and as Dr. French said, respecting the enemy. That's a hard notion, to respect and humanize your enemy. I mean, it's easy just to say, let's just call them targets and shoot at them. That's really easy, right? But what happens when you do that? You may shoot the wrong people, and then you may later have to deal with that post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So, yeah, he was humanizing and respecting the enemy, which is kind of a rare, all too rare thing. That's why I showed the video. But your point about that you're wired that way, I mean, there are theories of natural law that says that God or nature implanted into you the reason to know what's right and wrong, that we're wired that way. There's no empirical evidence either way. I appreciate your comments. Any other questions?
There is some evidence that's true, because when there are lesions into certain parts of the brain, you get behaviors that are clearly abnormal and don't have morals.
That's a great point. There are parts of the brain that would suppress that, Yes, sir, you had a question?
First of all, very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
How would this course have changed to students that you were presenting this to 60 years ago, 30 years ago?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question. Yeah, he said, how would this change my presentation and my course changed, 60, 40, 20 years ago? I mean, things have changed quite a bit, obviously, in military ethics. First of all, as far as this dehumanization piece and how we look at our enemy, I mean, that's changed dramatically. World War II in Korea and Vietnam, they also suffered from post-traumatic stress, but we didn't recognize it. So we have to address it in this kind of course. Also, warfare has changed so much since then. I mean, we now have our enemy embedded in the civilian population, and for a number of reasons that creates huge problems. One is we shouldn't kill people we don't have to kill, and secondly, we have to win the hearts and minds of the people to win the entire war. So we have to be careful from the mission view. So we have to talk more about ethics and doing it right, and frankly, we have more firepower. A single pilot now is a single pilot of an F-18 Super Hornet, and there's no one else in the plane. They have tremendous firepower. We've got guys in Nevada flying these remote-controlled drones over Pakistan. They're in Nevada. They're on a stick flying an armed, unmanned vehicle in Pakistan. Just yesterday, they fired another missile into the Taliban. And so you got guys in Nevada firing, killing people, and then that night going home to their families. Tremendous emotional stress. Yes, sir.
That's one aspect of it. The aspect I was thinking of was the quality of the student that you have.
Oh, I see, the quality of the
The makeup of the student that you have.
Yeah.
That you had to deal with 60 years ago, 30 years ago, and present.
Yeah.
But you presented the same course to those students.
Right. Great question. Yeah, great question. First of all, we have 15,000 applicants this year, 15,000, and we only have 1,200 spots. That's 7.5% acceptance. So we have a very selective kind of a group. So we have very bright students. My father graduated from the Naval Academy in 1941, and he took 4 semesters of gunnery, and he wished he'd taken 6 semesters of gunnery. It was a trade school back then. It was all about training and getting the shell to fall on the target. We don't teach gunnery anymore, so it's become more of a liberal arts education and with a technical component. We have a brighter set of students, I think, than back then. I'm probably not answering your question right, but
I was thinking more the moral and ethical makeup.
Yeah.
A student 60 years ago, 30 years ago.
You know, I don't know about the moral makeup of the students that far back. I know in the 11 years I've been here, I've actually seen less relativism and more, as I said earlier, the millennials, where they believe in they have loyalties and values. I've seen that myself in the last 11 years. I really can't go back 6 years. I can't answer your question without doing a lot of research around it. Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I was startled to see that one of the issues you addressed is when is it justified to go to war? And
Right.
I wondered, it got me wondering to what extent our military leaders have had an influence on whether or not we have gone to war.
That's a great question. The book we read in the course is called Just and Unjust Wars by Dr. Michael Walzer, who's probably one of the great theorists of just war theory. Our commandant, a midshipman, about 7 years ago, when he came to the Naval Academy, before he came there, he was in the Pentagon as the executive assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. When I showed him our textbook, he said that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs made everybody in the tank read that book. Everybody. That's like 400 officers had to read a book called Just and Unjust War. And the reason he made them read it is because he wanted them to participate in the discussion. Now, at the end of the day, the military don't get the vote, right? At the end of the day, the president and the Congress decides who we go to war with. But the military are the ones that have to do the dying. So we have to participate in the discussion. So what he was telling me was that they did participate in the discussion, that they had to frame the discussion with the Secretary of Defense and even with the president. But once the decision was made, our job is to fight all enemies, foreign and domestic, as we take an oath to do. So again, it's not a complete answer to your question, but we want to be able to participate in the discussion up until the point of the decision's made. Once the decision's made, we really shouldn't be second-guessing the president. We work for him or her. Does that make sense? Go ahead, please.
So, in your discussions about applying those standards to the war in Iraq, it seems it would be very difficult to discuss it without getting into politics.
Yes, good question.
So do you guys get into politics?
We try not to. We try to be apolitical here, but you know, you can't help it. Everybody looks at that war through their own lens. I mean, it's really an interesting war because people feel strongly either side. What I wanted to do is look at it through an intellectual academic lens and say, based on these 7 criteria that we've seen to develop over the last 300 years, does this war pass that criteria? And if you do it impartially, you find out it really doesn't. Some of the definitions, even goes back to Thomas Aquinas, doesn't seem to pass. So we try to have that more of an intellectual academic discussion than a political one. But people look at this war through their political lens, almost a complete polarity. So you're right. It's easy to go political, but we try not to. We try to stay academic on that one, and not with the idea of criticizing the administration, but the idea of taking an academic look at that war and its just cause. Yes, sir.
What would be the ethical responsibility of one of your students in light of the torture revelation?
Yeah.
They're given instructions to do things that are considered torture under the 3rd and 4th.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do study the Geneva Convention, and actually we have an entire course on the laws of armed conflict. So we want them to know the legal side. But in my course, I wanted to keep the legal world and the moral world separate. And I do that very intentionally because what's legal is not necessarily what's moral. And I consider the legal world the floor, the minimum. You know, don't go to jail. And I consider the moral world hopefully somewhere higher than that. And so I keep those two things separate. But the idea of the concept of torture, again, it's one of these very polarizing topics. And what I do in my course, I actually have them debate it. Half of them argue, I give them a situation, a terrorist, he's got information that's going to save lives, but he's not talking. And I tell this half of the class, prepare to debate on why we shouldn't torture him. And this half, prepare to debate why we should. And boy, it just comes out. And because I want them to see the issue, I want them to understand the issue. There's 2 strong sides to that, and then there's the legal side. Yes?
Other people have done it to our soldiers. We executed them. So,
right.
I mean, is that information given to them?
Of course. They're keenly aware of that, absolutely.
Does it affect their thinking in such a way that if something is torture when it's done by others, then it shouldn't be done by us?
I can't speak for the students, but I mean, it's certainly there, and they certainly understand that, and some of them use that as part of their argument.
Some of them write on it, right? There's
Write their term papers on it, on torture and permissibility. And of course, you know, we don't have to wave our fingers at them and say don't ever torture. It's the law. But we do want to discuss it from a moral aspect, because there are a lot of people that believe, you know what, if it's not life-threatening, if it's just a little bit of pain, and this can save thousands of lives, why not go for it? I mean, so we want to see both sides of that argument. And I'm not just, you know, take an easy way out, but I do want them to see both sides of that argument, and they know what the law says. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
In the discussion of conflict between warriors and barbarians, you know, and you want the warriors not to fall to the level of the barbarians. Right. But if it's warriors versus barbarians, humans versus zombies, how do you keep from going to the base level? Because you actually have to engage them at their same level in order to win.
This is Dr. French's area. Let me let you answer that. Please.
Well, I mean, my argument, which Rick already referred to, is that in that situation, the person you're most worried of not victimizing is actually yourself. I mean, in most situations, the Code of the Warrior protects the innocents. You know, that's a big part of it, is that obviously you don't want the warriors going out of control and killing people who don't deserve to be killed. But if you happen to be in this situation where it's, you know, you against the zombies and killing them really isn't the issue, and their innocence isn't the issue, then you also have to think about, if I do these horrible things, if I torture, you know, if I cross these lines that are meant, should be bright lines, what does that do to me? What have I turned into? What have I destroyed inside myself, inside my character? And hopefully we try to get them to understand that is something they need to preserve, that they need to not sacrifice. Among the other things they're sacrificing, they need to not sacrifice their moral character. And we talk about it for the individual and also for the organization. On the individual level, you have the consequences of post-traumatic stress and their future moral life being damaged by this. And on the organizational level, you have, as we've seen with things like Abu Ghraib, that once you lose that moral high ground, whatever the context, it is very difficult to restore that, and it even damages your potential moving forward to get other people to buy into a positive identity and restore that organization. So the damage is so widespread that it's really not about them.
Great answer, thank you. Any final questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any evidence that the Japanese army, after the rape of Nanking, had problems fighting after that, or being a cohesive unit?
Actually, there is. It's really interesting. They're just starting to be more studies about what we call post-traumatic stress coming out of World War II on the Japanese side. And there's more emerging on this, that it was a very strong cultural taboo to express having reservations about some of the behavior. But as that is changing, and as the culture is changing, they are now starting to do studies, and they are finding that, hey, what do you know? We have PTSD even in a very different cultural setting. Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you.